Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the E-Commerce Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, Director of Digital Product Strategy here at Common Thread Collective. And I'm joined today by two very special guests. One, you've seen him before on this podcast many a time. It's our VP of E-Commerce Strategy, Mr. Luke Austin, joining us to kind of report from the trenches. And then a second special guest, we haven't had him on, or he hasn't been on with me, at least in a long time, Director of Data here at Common Thread Collective, Mr. Steve Rekuc. What is going on, guys?
Decided to jam on some spend aMER models. I think some of you may have seen Steve on the Operators Pod not too long ago discussing this topic at a high level. So we've got some things going on that I think will be interesting to share with you all. But we're gonna do a deeper dive into spend aMER model, spending power, how this fits into the CTC system, and what the output of these things actually look like. Walk through a couple of these models in person, live.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the point of this really is to give you guys a detailed sense of like what the actual concrete impact on your business can be of setting one of these spend and aMER models up. If you've been paying attention to the news, you've probably seen that costs are going up everywhere, and consumer expectations are similarly going up. For fast-growing e-commerce brands, that means increased fulfillment fees, parcel costs, and squeezed margins. With the changes to global trade, brands are seeing a massive spike of 15 to 35%. And with the changes to USPS Parcel Select, delivery costs could balloon well beyond 25%. In order for your brand to survive, you will need a scalable commerce enablement provider who can adapt to these changing markets and help you deliver the best consumer experience at scale. That's precisely what Stored does every day for their partners. In 2024, Stored saved $130 million on parcel fees for its customers, and after powering nearly 1% of all U.S. online Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales, they have the infrastructure and integrated technology to help you grow in 2025 and beyond, no matter how many disruptions occur. Don't just take my word for it. You can experience it for yourself. They've just rolled out an in-depth mystery shopping report. This report compares your brand against two competitors and presents you with real, actionable insights based on industry benchmarks. To request your free report, go to stored.link/mystery. That's STORD.link/mystery. Take the mystery out of your consumer experience with Stored. So just a couple words quickly about like why we're talking about this now. So currently, as you're listening to this will probably have launched the previous day, but we're running a special offer for brands that are in the 8-9 figure range. And the idea here is we want to talk to you, and if we determine that it's a good fit, we want to build one of these models for you for free. So if you're interested, let us know. Click the hire us button, commonthreadco.com. Let us know that you're interested in getting one of these free reports. So without further ado, let's jump into exactly what one of these reports can do for you, starting with some definitions here. So Luke, why don't you tell us what is a spend and aMER report, just so we cover our bases, and then we can roll from there.
Yeah. So for those following along in a visual format, we'll be sharing along the way as well, just to give us a better sense of how these tools live within our system, and you can follow along that way, and then we'll try to describe it as well for those listening in. So the spend aMER model is really the starting point of our forecasting and planning process at CTC. First comes data integration, getting all the costs right, getting the marketing calendar ingested, et cetera, all the data points that are required to be able to build a forecast and the modeling off of. But the spend aMER model is the first step once we have the data ingested, all the costs right, and being able to project out future expectations for the business outcome and what the budget allocation should be for the business. And so what you're seeing here is an overview of the planning process. And on the left-hand menu, what we have in sort of sequential order is that we start with our custom models, the new customer model, returning customer model, event effect model. Then we go into the marketing calendar and event planning and the impact of email and SMS sends against each of those days. Then we go to budget decomposition, really channel level spend targets, and then spend targets by day based on day of week effect, the event effect model, and incrementality informing the ROAS targets for each of the channels. Then we ingest all the sort of cost level details on the P&L side related to taxes and shipping, confirming discount rates and returns, et cetera. Then we get to a full P&L level output. So we've talked about this in some other spaces and some other podcasts of a high level of the planning process and what those other components are. But what we're going to deep dive into is the spend aMER model, or the new customer model today. what that is. And it's the first step in this planning, in that sequence of planning process that I just talked through. And what it does is helps to set the optimal budget allocation amount based on your business objective for the coming year, so that we build out a year-long P&L level forecast. The first question that we're needing to understand is, what is the optimal budget, total budget allocation across all channels against your specific business objective? That's going to set what the new customer revenue expectation is. It's going to set what the contribution margin from new customers is. That's going to feed into how many new customers we're going to acquire each month that will then be returning customers and feed the returning customer model. But this is the starting point. And what we've seen over the years of doing this is the spend aMER model output is shocking for almost every brand. There aren't a lot of spend aMER model outputs that we'll look at and be like, oh yeah, that's like, that's 5% different than what our previous budget expectation was. So this helped us sort of fine tune and calibrate it. The output tends to be much more dramatic than that, in showing brands they're substantially overspending the expectation and way past the efficiency curve in terms of the degradation of their media spend, or that they're leaving meaningful opportunity on the table without taking into the context of LTV, repeat purchase against the new customers, or some of those other factors. So the output is really dramatic. And so we're going to show here two individual brands, actual aMER, spend aMER models, and some of what that output looks like to illustrate this really specifically. But before we do, I think it would be helpful, Steve being the brains, the mastermind behind spend aMER model and the creation of them, to sort of give us a backdrop, if you would, Steve, on how do we build spend aMER models? What are they? What are the data points we're pulling into it? What type of models are they? Let's get granular on what the work that goes into building these out, and then we can share these two brand specific output.
Sure, Luke. I think one of the things that's important to point out in that is that it's not necessarily the same each month either. So it might be that you're underspending in one month and underspending in the next month. And that's one of the things that I focus on in building the spend versus aMER model. So we're kind of establishing curves for every previous month that we have good data for, that you've kind of spent in the same sort of region and had the same relative amount of new customers. So we're working within kind of bounds of what you have done in the past, establish what you've done in the past, and see how that spending power has looked. Like, how much can you spend with your aMER degrading? How quickly does it degrade in all the past months? Then we're creating multiple models for the future, to 40 different models that we utilize, and then pare down using an ensemble model. So we're going to throw out some of the worst models that either say, oh, you're going to grow exponentially or you're going to crash exponentially. So we're looking at like the reasonable considerations, and then using the ensemble model, we're taking a combination of those to determine what is most closely reflective of the past, and then is most closely reflected then of what's going to occur in the future for your brand.
Great. So in ensemble model, there's 40 different models that we're looking at to potentially include into this, looking at things like seasonality factors, the historical degradation of the efficiency. We even look at things like Google search trends, right, around the category, and take these things into account in building the model that is most predictive of what the future months look like. And then in terms of our confidence level in the models, we're combining these models together to create what the best output is. That could be up to 40 models that we're including in this one ensemble model output. And then what are we doing, Steve, in terms of back testing the output of these models, or understanding how confident we can be in the output that they're generating?
Yeah, I'm checking all the previous iterations to see if, in using that ensemble, how closely we would have come in the past to predicting the spending power, and then the CAC and the aMER of previous months. So we're trying to kind of aim and get within a very reasonable bound. Typically, we're within like 5-10% of what they've done in the past with those models.
Great. And then let's talk about another concept, which I think is which is important to this discussion, which is the idea of spending power. So spending power is a way that we're able to back into brands' ability to increase media spend velocity or volume, and the relationship of that to the degradation of that media spend, the efficiency related to that at different levels. And every brand has a different spending power available to them. Some brands, media just degrades more quickly than others. It falls off the cliff faster, whereas others are able to continue to spend with lower degradation of the efficiency. So Steve, talk to us a bit about spending power and how we think about that idea in this output.
That was a great concept that we kind of developed to convey how quickly a brand's ability to spend without degrading their efficiency kind of came about. And it does vary significantly from brand to brand, as well as from month to month. So some brands are a little bit more seasonally agnostic. If you're selling something like an auto part or supplements or medicine, those tend to be a little bit more stable over the year, where you're not seeing as much variance. Whereas if you're selling something that's a little bit more outdoor specific, like skis or goggles, like they're going to be heavily concentrated in that late fall and winter timeframe. So it's important kind of to establish this for your brand. And that's one of the reasons why we want to offer it to potential clients, in that we get to kind of see what's going on with your brand, and you get to see what's going on with your brand over time and into the future.
Yeah. So actually, maybe to summarize that real quick, like the idea behind one of these spend aMER models, if you break it down to like the most concrete definition, is this gives you the most accurate possible, at least as far as we can tell, right? The most accurate forecast of what is likely to happen for your specific brand and the seasonality of your product. So, and that's the thing that helps you kind of make those judgment calls on budget allocation, on spend, whatever, because you have some understanding of what's expected to happen, and that's much more clear. And it's not just sort of an arbitrary guess, which oftentimes is what people are building their forecasts off of. So just wanted to make sure that we kind of clarified that specific reason. But anyway, I'll throw it back to you guys.
Yeah.
Get mystery shopped for your brand and 2 competitors of your choice for free. Stored will provide a detailed report that outlines the specific areas you're outperforming your competitors and where your competitors are outperforming you. Learn how your consumers truly experience your brand today. Request your free report at stored.link/mystery. That's STORD.link/mystery.
That's great. So to close the loop on this piece of the conversation around the methodology and approach for building out these ensemble models, well, we've also got up here on the screen visually for those looking. I'll describe it for those just listening. Is the workbook on the back end of what it could look like for one of these ensemble models for a spend aMER model. And what you're seeing is, for most of us, not something we'll be able to track along with much, but is lines and lines of code that goes into applying each of these various models onto the data set, seeing what the output in terms of the predictability of applying that model against the data set is, and then deciding whether to include or discard that model, and working through each of the models in that way to get to the best ensemble model output. That was probably the highest level way of describing what's going on here. Steve, anything you'd add in terms of what we look at or what goes into the workbook behind the scenes before we get to the actual model output examples?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of consideration to kind of remove outliers and to see performance that's indicative of what your brand has been doing most recently. We're kind of throwing out some of the more, maybe the high points that you might have had back in 2020, or even some of the lower points that happened as well as a brand starting to grow or a brand's kind of diversifying.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So the data set, having a data set that's clean and going to have data points indicative of the future is really important. And then applying various models and seeing what the output is. So that's what how the spend aMER model fits into our system from a forecasting and planning standpoint is the initial point in the process. Steve walked us through what we look at in building the spend aMER models to get to the highest confidence output possible. And then we'll land here with 2 brands specific spend aMER model outputs and what some of those sort of surprising results that we referenced earlier, how that can actually take shape. So what we have up here is an example of a spend aMER model in StatList for a specific brand. And we can see a couple things, which is we have every month of the year, spend aMER, new customer revenue, new customer contribution margin, as well as the core sort of inputs and settings that we're taking into account that are being applied onto the model. So our fully loaded cost of delivery percentage is an input here that we're taking into account. We're taking into account the AOV, taking into account LTV multiplier over different time periods. So we can look at 60-day LTV, 90, 120, 1-year LTV to get into what that expectation will be. And then what we're able to see, which is the core output here, is what is the model's recommended spend level, so total budget allocation based on the stated business objective for that specific time period. So what we can see here is this is a good example of a brand that we started working with earlier this year. But to start out the year, they had a really different sort of approach in terms of their budget allocation. They were spending a lot more money than we are spending with them now. And one of the big reasons for that was the spend aMER model giving us clear indication into what the optimal total budget allocation was. So this is an apparel brand. They sit within that category. And what you can see is we're looking at March of 2025. So earlier on this year, they spent $2.14 million total in ad spend at a 1.63 aMER. And what we can see is what the model would recommend. We have 3 different sort of business objective output selections. One is to maximize contribution margin from first-time customers in month 1. So I want the maximum amount of contribution margin from my new customers this month. The second option is I want to maximize the contribution margin for my first-time customers over a set LTV defined period, so lifetime contribution margin. So I want to maximize my contribution margin over 90 days or 120 days or over the next year. So that's going to allow you to be more aggressive than maximizing CM in month 1, right? Because you're willing to accept a longer time period. And then the most aggressive business objective scenario, which is going to be maximizing revenue in month 1 at a break-even first-time customer contribution margin. So I'm willing to go break-even on first-time customer CM. I'm going to get plenty of CM from my returning customer cohort, so I'm good there. I'm pushing for top-line revenue and growth. And so what we see here is in March, they spent $2.14 million in total ad spend. The spend aMER model recommendation based on a maximize contribution margin stated business objective, so maximizing CM from first-time customers, the most conservative scenario is 1.06 million in total ad spend. So 1.06 million to 2.14 was the actual, is the gap that exists between those 2 recommended scenarios. And we can see this sort of come to life in the different levels of degradation of the efficiency for this brand as well. We're able to see across different levels of spend, different intervals of spend, how the efficiency degrades over time for this business. And so what we have up on the screen here, for those just listening along, is every $20,000 interval of incremental spend and what the efficiency is associated with that $20,000 of incremental spend. So as you spend $20,000 more from set level, what is the incremental aMER associated with that spend, the incremental new customer revenue, and the incremental contribution margin from that. And so what we're able to see is for March of 2025, the break-even point on first-time customer contribution margin for this business was right around $1.6 million in spend. So right around $1.6 million in spend, or 2.34 aMER, is where this brand would be at break-even first-time customer contribution margin. So anything past $1.6 million in March of 2025 starts to yield negative first-time customer contribution margin in increasing at increasing amounts, because the efficiency degrades more quickly as you scale up in that way as well. So drawing this back to, they spent $2.14 million in March 2025. That was a negative $400,000, a little over negative $400,000 in first-time customer contribution margin within that month. And what the model was stating is that we could have spent, instead of 2.14 million, the break-even point being 1.6 million, we could have spent 1.6 million instead of 2.14. And the trade-off in terms of the top-line revenue against that incremental media spend would have been about $200,000, right around that amount. $220,000 would be the difference in that trade-off between those spend. those spend gaps.
I want to zoom in on this because I think this is kind of where the sparkle is when you show these types of models to people, where you're demonstrating that like each additional tranche of, let's say, 20K in spend is actually losing you money over a certain point. And so let's say hypothetically, this brand, when they were spending 2 point whatever million, and they were getting 1.68 aMER. Let's say that was their efficiency target or something like that. And that's kind of the reason this happens. It's like we want to continue to push spend as long as we're at performance. They're at performance, so they're like, let's keep going. But what you see, scroll up here in this, let's go back to the top, go back to their actuals. Yeah, so we see, a spend of 2.14 mil, yielding revenue of 3.4, and then go to the max CM version of this. Let's pop back to that. Right. So actually what we're looking at is a difference of maybe like $100,000 in top line revenue. And so what this demonstrates is like they could have spent $1 million and gotten the same amount and gotten much, much wider efficiency. And that would have produced the contribution margin that they wanted. And so this is exactly what these spend and aMER models reveal to you, is like not just if your spend overall is efficient or not, but what specific tranches of spend over a certain point are actually becoming inefficient, and how far could you dial it back to actually attain more efficiency and actually even hit essentially the same top line revenue number.
Yep, that's exactly right. And what we all know is that there's opportunity cost in either direction, right? I'm going to pull back media spend and there's going to be some impact to my top line revenue. Absolutely. Like that relationship is going to exist to some extent. And the other direction, the same thing. I'm going to push more media spend, drive more top line revenue, but my profitability at some point will be impacted. My profitability percent will for sure be impacted. But what the spend aMER model allows us to do is to quantify what that trade-off is ultimately at the end of the day, for us to be able to quantify what that opportunity cost is between the decisions. If I spend $500,000 less this month, what is the trade-off? How much less top line revenue am I getting, and how much more bottom line am I getting? And be able to assess the optimal point of budget allocation based on the stated business objective. And to this example, there's a much wider range of possible outcomes that I think many brands understand in terms of the choices that they have, right? Mm-hmm. It's many of the conversations related to media budget allocation tend to be, okay, we've, in this example, 2.14 in media spend, right? In March of 2025, the conversations may be around, well, we spend around $2 million a month on our core DR channels. It kind of scales up some in November, and maybe into December, Black Friday, Cyber Monday holiday, but like $2 million a month in sort of a normal month. So if we're trying to be more efficient, could we cut back, 10%, 15% and be a little more efficient for these next months? What the spend aMER model is saying is like, no, zoom out. You could assess this in a completely different way. What if you cut media spend in half, right? What is the impact to your top line and your bottom line in different timing outcomes? What if it's a 15% difference, right? What if it's 30% difference? And then what if you went the other direction as well, right? For this brand, it's sort of indicating we should be more efficient and pull back, but we'll show the other example here, which is a brand where it's indicating the other thing. Because of the LTV impact, there's more room to push, there's more ability to lean in and drive more volume. But what this does is it helps us to quantify the trade-off and the opportunity cost between incremental levels of spend every $5,000, $10,000, or $20,000. What is the trade-off in top line and bottom line? And then for us to be able to zoom out and have a much bigger conversation around what are we trying to do with the business and what is the total budget allocation that's going to get us there, rather than orienting things just around, okay, here's our sort of trailing 12-month media budget, here's our MER or our percentage of revenue, our ACOS. That's what we're going to set it as. So whatever the percentage of revenue is, that's what the media budget is going to be. That misses 40 different models of input and being able to assess what your potential outcomes could be for the business.
Cool. All right, let's roll. I'll let you kind of click over to this next one here. Okay, so just to recap, what we're looking at here is essentially a brand that when they came to us, what we've determined via the spend and aMER model is that they were underspending. They were just sort of like making the opposite mistake. So let's dig into that.
That's right. And the main impact here, so this another reason this is interesting to look at is this is a supplement brand with very high LTV. There's top 5 percentile in terms of the LTV outcome against this brand. And so what that does is it shows up in the disparity between the maximized contribution margin and the maximized lifetime contribution margin business selections. So what we're doing here, we're looking at September 2025. Maximizing contribution margin in that month for this business looks like spending $316,000 at a 383 aMER for $1.2 million in new customer revenue. $316,000 for max CM. Maximizing lifetime CM for this brand in September 2025 looks like spending $855,000 at a 204 aMER to drive 1.74 in first-time customer revenue. So $316,000 versus $855,000, both with the objective of maximizing contribution margin, right? They're both after the same thing, maximizing contribution margin for the business, but they're constrained by different time bounds. The first is maximize contribution this month. The other is I actually want to maximize contribution margin from this cohort of new customers within a year. So how much can I push to be able to get there against that customer cohort? And we can see the breakdown, sort of the trade-off of these different levels of spend in the spend aMER data points here that we have on the screen, where we're able to see how much the lifetime contribution margin starts to separate, right? In month one, the difference in new customer revenue is really small, all right? There's a max CM. The max CM lower spend scenario is going to drive $1.2 million in new customer revenue. The max lifetime contribution margin is going to drive $1.7 million in new customer revenue. So it's just a difference of $500,000 in new customer revenue in month one, which after you take out the additional ad spend and cost of delivery, like it doesn't seem like it would pencil to be able to maximize the contribution margin outcome for the business. But when you apply 350% LTV increase within 1 year, it's a whole different ballgame, because that additional volume of new customers that you're acquiring in month one is going to drive an outsized impact within a year in terms of the broader contribution margin. So the lifetime contribution margin, even though the new customer contribution margin, or new customer revenue, there isn't a massive difference there. The lifetime contribution margin is where we see the difference start to show up, where by engaging with the max lifetime CM strategy, so $855K instead of $316K in spend, the brand's going to drive $500,000 more of contribution margin within a year time period.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it's a good illustration of like nailing down. I mean, in order to make this work for yourself, you have to have some understanding of what your business's core goal is, like what you're trying to maximize. But then also, like in this particular instance with the supplement brand, some understanding of kind of the inherent mechanics of your business, that if you want to maximize these certain things and you have a business that's where your 1 year LTV is spectacular, normally when you're sort of sitting down and forecasting by kind of guessing what's going to happen based on what happened in the past, that's the type of thing that's very difficult to have the foresight to do. But with the sort of the 40 different models system that we have here, being actually algorithmically able to predict LTV over the course of a year really transforms the way that you behave now. And I think that's kind of what we're showing here, is like your ability to affect your future a year from now actually starts here in kind of constructing this forecasting model.
That's exactly right. And the other layer that is what we'll add on in addition to the LTV is the halo effect or impact across other sales channels that driving media spend here is resulting in, right? So Amazon be the big one, where for most brands who sell on Amazon, there's a substantial halo effect of the spend that you're driving towards your D2C business on your Amazon business. As a heuristic, like it's probably in the neighborhood of 20 to 30% minimum in terms of the halo effect. It's different for every brand, but there is an impact. And so what we see is not just for brands with some LTV outcome, but also more for brands that have a substantial distribution across other sales channels, is that many are underspending against the opportunity for their business by not having the full purview of the sales channels and the LTV against the spend aMER model brought into the picture, which is what it's all about, bringing everything into the picture and then being able to see what the business outcome is against the total business perspective. Otherwise, it can be really easy to continue to overspend against the opportunity and just sort of accept like, well, I think we got to spend $2 million a month, like the first example, to keep our revenue up. And that's just sort of like the range we'll be in. Or in this case, to underspend meaningfully against what the opportunity could look like.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say I'm somebody who's sitting here. I'm the CMO of an 8-9 figure company, and I'm listening to this. What problems am I struggling with right now that this solves? So obviously we've given some examples. You maybe have some sense of what that would be, but just give me a concrete picture of like the situation that this CMO is in, that this then comes in and clarifies a lot for him. Steve?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this definitely helps them kind of figure out how their spend is impacting each month differently and how to kind of optimize the spend in each future month so that they can maximize their contribution margin or their lifetime contribution margin, or how much can they push revenue without degrading too much into their contribution margin. It's kind of really important to establish and understand that for your brand so you at least know the map of what you're about to do, rather than just set a constant $2 million a month budget.
Yeah, that makes sense. Luke?
Yeah. This will first help in any conversations related to forecasting and budget planning, which we all find ourselves in to some extent, either on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, or planning out annually for the year. So this tool is going to be essential and very helpful in understanding what the revenue outcome is going to look like for your business at different levels of spend and helping you to set what the total budget allocation should be. Connected to that, and to build off what Steve said, is it's going to allow brands to think differently than they likely have in terms of what the range of possible outcomes for their business look like and the levers and options that they have in terms of the total budget allocation against those things. It's going to widen the conversation. It's going to widen the purview to think about outcomes that might exist outside of the current set of considerations that come up in the monthly, quarterly, annual forecasting conversations. And it's like when we love looking at the output of these spend aMER models when Steve and team finishes them, because it's always surprising. There's a really dramatic output that exists with each one of these that leads to some challenging conversations and some really fascinating conversations that we have together with the brands that we work with and build these for, because it highlights things in terms of the historical media mix that could have been done differently potentially, but more importantly, it widens the conversation in terms of how we can approach the future in the context of the business objective. And it's fascinating.
Yeah. I think too, like that I can sort of picture a situation in which everything at your business is kind of going fine, but you're kind of at a loss to figure out how to break through to another layer of growth or whatever, right? Like if you continue doing what you're doing, you'll be okay. You'll maybe grow a little bit, whatever, but you're just racking your brain to try to figure out like how could I possibly like break through or break away from this kind of current situation that I'm in. And what the spend and aMER model does by offering basically like insight into hidden information is it reveals to you exactly the levers that you could pull to get there, because it shows you what's actually happening and what's actually likely to happen. Steve, did you want to jump in with something?
Well, yeah, I think it also adds the opportunity in certain months where you're like, oh, we could press spend a little bit more in May and maybe not as much in June. So it points out some of those opportunities. I think it's important to understand and set that as a baseline, because for future months, because then you can also determine if we need to do something more, if we have a new product launch or have a special marketing moment, one of the 4 peaks that we often recommend, in that you can push these up a little bit. You can say that we're going to do better than the model because we're going to do something. And that's where like our growth strategy team comes in and helping to advise and suggest what they could do to improve on that.
No, that makes a ton of sense.
That reminded me. One other example, we could go through so many different examples, but work with a brand, personal care brand, middle of last year that we built spend aMER model for and then worked with. And the output of the spend aMER model was that for the consecutive months of the remainder of the back half of last year, they spent close to half the amount that they were spending previously on their core conversion optimized media and drove the same new customer revenue outcome that they were driving previously, and at substantially higher contribution margin, obviously, right? Because you have so much less media spend against it. And that's fantastic. The savings are great, but what that ultimately allows you to do is find new ways to allocate that media that's going to produce incremental growth, right? It's basically showing you the current playbook that you have on your core conversion channels, and the thing, like, you can't just keep increasing the budget and expect it to produce incremental outcomes at some. Let's take those dollars and let's reinvest them into higher levers that are going to increase the efficiency of the business as a whole. So additional creative output, channel expansion, investment into product collaborations, marketing moments, all the things we talk about all the time, right? But be able to understand, cool, this is the necessary budget level, but then let's take the excess and the remaining and invest it into things that are into units of growth that are going to produce incremental gains for the business. So
yeah, no, it makes sense. So again, if this is something that you're interested in, again, if you're an 8-9 figure business and you're curious to figure out how to break through the next level of spend here, to break through the next level of growth, to understand what's actually going on in your business, and sort of what hidden factors are playing a role in maybe a lack of efficiency that you can't fully see for yourself right now, we want to talk to you. Hit us up, commonthreadco.com, hit that hire us button. Let us know that you're interested in the spend and aMER model. We'll get in touch with you if we think you're a fit, and we can move forward from there. Okay. Anything else that you guys want to hit on this? Any sort of maybe key takeaways from this exercise in general? Steve?
Yeah, I think these are crucial to kind of get built. That's why it's the starting point for our forecast is to establish what we think you can spend profitably and then work out the details from there. But it's almost like building the map of what's possible for your business in the future in terms of profitability versus your spend in these typical ad channels. And I think it's a necessity.
Luke?
Nothing else to add.
Do it. That's right.
Yes,
Let us do it. Get in touch with us. We'll build this map for you. All right, folks. Well, Luke, Steve, appreciate you joining me today. And to everybody else out there, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.
Thank you, Richard.